Starliner Media. Starliner Media presents Music Night at the Majestic with your host, Michael Boswell.
All right, it's time once again for Music Night at the Majestic. And with us tonight, Steve and Anthony from Rebel Kicks. Guys, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having us.
Hey, you guys have an interesting backstory musically, and that all those different influences can be heard in your music. So why don't we start out with it? We frequently say on the show, every musician's story starts somewhere. So,
Sure.
Steve, we'll start with you. Since Anthony's down in Florida right now and enjoying the warmth, and you and I are stuck in the cold, we'll make him wait.
It's very cold. Well, I guess it started when we were both born. Our dad's a musician, and so from as early as 4 or 5, I remember going to shows. He would be performing in Atlantic City, all over, and we would go and we would watch him, and I would watch him, and I would say, that's what I want to do. I saw him perform to the crowds, and it was this electricity in the room, and it was all big band stuff, all stuff like that. But I was like, I knew in that moment, it was like this feeling that I needed to do that. And I still need to do it every single day. And I'm lucky that I get to do it with my brother, which is awesome.
Yeah.
So that's kind of how it started. And then my mom really pushed us to do it. Like, she was always like the driving force. Like, this is what you want to do. You got to pursue it like 100%. And we always have,
Yeah. Now I'm going to say the odds are, Anthony, same thing for you.
Yeah, same thing here. Just watching our dad together, and from an early age, not only going to see him, but he would bring us up on stage to perform with him. And so we got a taste of it from a very, very, very young age. And then it's just something that we've always done instinctively. And so it was just a natural progression from doing it when we were kids to starting to do it on like a semi-professional level once we got to, our teenage years. And then we started forming our own bands and started writing songs together. And it was just, natural step at one after the other to where we went into it full-time professionally. And that's really due to our parents. I mean, they never pushed it on us, but they said, if you have a passion for this, and they saw that we had a talent for it. And so they nurtured it. And they said, if you want to do this professionally, you have our support. And, we're very lucky in that sense, because a lot of people don't have that support system. And so we're very blessed.
Yeah, well, the fact that you guys are both multi-instrumentalists kind of says there's a passion there. Now, for you, Steve, what was the first instrument you gravitated to?
Oh, I went through every single instrument you could think of, and I hated them all. I thought I was just going to be a singer. And I think I started at like 9. Anthony started playing guitar at 9. So I was like, oh, of course, guitar. Hated it. I went to drums, hated that. Piano, hated that. And I was like, all right. So finally at 14, I picked up the bass, and it was almost like Nirvana moment. Like, this is it. This is the instrument that I don't know. I've played bass ever since, and I love the bass. And now I've started playing other instruments due to the bass. Like I feel like it was like, if it was forced on me, I didn't want to do it, but because I found it, it was mine. I don't know if that makes any sense.
Well, it's the rebel of Rebel Kicks.
Yeah, that's me. He's the Kicks. I'm the rebel. But yeah, that's when I started playing. And I had like just started playing at 14, and Anthony had a gig in the city in Manhattan, and my dad was playing bass with him. And then my dad started getting calls for other gigs, and he couldn't do the gig anymore. So he walked into my room, and he was like, all right, we have a gig on Friday. Here's a set list. Learn all these songs. So it was kind of forced on me, but it was good. It was like a trial by fire. So I kind of took that and ran with it.
Yeah. Now, how about you, Anthony?
I started playing guitar at 9. My dad plays guitar, he plays bass, and he's primarily a vocalist. But so we had guitars and a couple of basses lying around the house, but I didn't really pick it up until, I was on a car ride coming back to our home in Staten Island from Long Island. I was out in the Hamptons with my aunt and my cousins, and she was driving us back, and she popped a cassette into the tape deck in the car, and it was the Beatles 1962 to 66 compilation, the Red Album.
Mm-hmm.
And she said to me, "Anthony, do you know who the Beatles are?" And I said, "No," which was funny because I was very, very well aware of who Paul McCartney was. As you can see, I'm wearing a Wings t-shirt here, but because our dad is a huge Beatles, Paul McCartney guy, but for some reason the Beatles weren't really on our radar when we were young, but the Paul McCartney stuff was. And so she said, "Oh, well, this is the Beatles. Check it out." And she played that album for us on the way home. And I remember I was just completely mesmerized by that music. And she said, when you get inside to the house, when she dropped me off, she said, "Ask your dad if he knows who the Beatles are." And so I remember walking up the walkway to our house, and that was the first thing I said. I said, "Dad, I just heard this really great group. Do you know who the Beatles are?" And he said, "Come with me, son." And he brought me inside, and he had all this stuff on CD, and gave me his entire CD collection and said, "Check all these out." And that's when my obsession, not only with the Beatles, but with guitar began, because then I got really into that stuff, and I started watching the movies. I remember we used to watch A Hard Day's Night when we were kids, and all of those sequences, I remember I would just sit in front of the TV and stare at John Lennon and George Harrison's fingers going up and down the neck. I was like, I need to do that. And so then I started picking up my dad's guitar, started teaching myself. He started teaching me some things, and he, because he's a self-taught guitar player, and he was like, "You know what? I can see that you have a natural gift for this, so we're going to send you for some actual lessons so you can learn everything correctly." So that's where the guitar playing started for me. And then naturally from there, I picked up the bass, dabbled in that, and we always dabbled in different instruments to the point where, when we got a little older, and we started buying our own instrumentation and bringing things in, then we got little keyboards and drums and stuff, and so that's how all that started.
Yeah. Well, tell me this, since we're talking about the Beatles.
Sure.
Favorite Beatles album. Anthony, you first, then Steve, I'll give you a moment to think about it.
My favorite Beatles album is the White Album.
Because
I just love the variety. I think that it's so expansive because there's 30 songs on it, and you get a little bit of everything that I love about them, which is just how versatile they were as songwriters and as performers. I mean, you have McCartney doing stuff like I Will and Blackbird, and then on the other side he's doing Helter Skelter, and Lennon's doing, Everybody's Got Something to Hide Except for Me and My Monkey, and then he's got Julia, which is this really beautiful acoustic thing, and just shows how versatile they were. It's tough, because every album they did, there's not a bad one in the bunch, and they're all different, so tomorrow I could say Abbey Road, so it's
I was gonna say Different Day, Different Me. I feel like if I had a desert island album, it would be the White Album, because it's the most eclectic, but they're all kind of eclectic in a way. I mean, Sgt. Pepper, I think, is a masterpiece. So is Revolver. I would have to go with Revolver. Revolver is one of the best albums of all time, and the 50th anniversary was the remix. Give it to me all day.
Yeah, it's a funny it's a funny thing, because whenever we talk to other musicians and just people who are fans of that stuff, there's no wrong answer, because you could say Please Please Me or with the Beatles, or an American Capitol compilation that they made, like introducing the Beatles, or Meet the Beatles, or anything. There's no wrong answer, because it's all great. It's all great stuff.
Yeah, now see, like for me, I always bounce between Revolver, Rubber Soul,
Hmm.
and Help.
Sure.
Sure.
And it all depends on what day, what mood I'm in, and sometimes what time of day. Because in the morning it might be Help, and by the evening it's Revolver. So
Absolutely.
Sure.
And it's
now,
amazing. I'm sorry.
no, go ahead.
Like the progression between those three albums, I think, is the most. Is you can just hear like how they really progressed, and the drugs too. Really, definitely.
And the Maharishi.
And the Maharishi. That's right.
Well, tell you, since you got the Wings shirt on, Anthony, what's a couple of your favorite songs from the Wings era McCartney catalog?
Oh wow! I mean, there's so many. He's a genius. So it's I love all that stuff. But let's see. I always love the album tracks. So stuff like "Call Me Back Again" from Venus and Mars always blew me away. His vocals on that are absolutely incredible. He's doing that, like, to me, it's a sister song to like "Got to Get You Into My Life," where it's clearly inspired by that Motown Stax horn-driven sound. And when he gets into that vocal register where he's just doing his Little Richard thing, I always loved that. Like one of my favorite Beatle recordings is "Long Tall Sally," their cover of that, because I'd never heard anything like that when I was a kid. And I remember the first time I heard that, I was like, "What is this? This is the most incredible thing I've ever heard." And he's so multifaceted that like I said, he can sing that, and then he can sing like the most tender ballad, and they were just amazing. But so, like, "Call Me Back Again." I love a song called "Don't Let It Bring You Down" from London Town. There's a great song on "Back to the Egg" called "Arrow Through Me," which sort of has this Stevie Wonder-ish, like, R&B vibe to it. But I'm a big fan of all of it. It's just great stuff.
I love Spin It On from Back to the Egg. It's like pseudo punk. It just gets you right in the mood. That whole album is one of my favorites of all time. That Rockestra is incredible. I love Let 'Em In. I think we've seen McCartney
12 times.
I was going to say 14,
like
something like that.
Yeah.
I've seen him. That was my first concert ever, 2002. And I think every concert from then it's all downhill from there. No, every concert I've ever been to is amazing. But he's just so mesmerizing. He's just so powerful. He has #1 hits he's never done live. I can't imagine another act that's ever done that, ever. He has so many #1 hits. He's never done a couple of them live. It's incredible.
Well, yes, when your catalog is that big, covers that many decades,
right?
That's just amazing.
Yeah, then there's only a handful of acts like that. It would be like seeing Sinatra back in the day toward the end, where, like, this guy's been performing for 6 or 7 decades. And it's like, what is he going to perform?
Right. Stevie Wonder.
Yeah.
Paul Simon, Elton John. Oh, yeah.
The Stones.
Well, yeah, it always amazes me how you have some artists who have a very short time period that their career where they're producing material that's kept them on top.
Right.
Then you have people who, as we said, for decades, just continually put out material that stands the test of time. And it's just amazing when somebody has that ability.
Yeah, because it's more rare than the other side of it, because the business is so fickle that it's hard to keep writing things that you don't know what's going to connect with people. And to do it consistently like that, it's an amazing feat.
Well, I was going to say, as Anthony said, as the business changes and tastes change,
Right.
Mhm.
it's real easy to chase the flavor of the moment.
Right.
And when you do, frequently, those songs sound like a diluted version of what you're known for.
Mm.
Or
Right.
sometimes you sound like you're desperate when you're
Right.
chasing a disco sound or you're chasing this sound or whatever.
Right.
And, the artists who can incorporate it, it works. But if you can't, it just sounds very shallow. And
Right.
McCartney was able to do that. Stevie Wonder was able to do that. Yeah. So it's just interesting to see who has that, not only that innate ability to write songs that connect with people, but can adapt to the times and not sound like they're selling out.
Sure.
Right.
I think a good song, I learned this from a really great producer down in Florida. He said, I don't care what production you want on this track. I don't really care. Play it for me on the piano. Because a good song is a good song is a good song. And if it connects with me on the piano, then we can do whatever production you want to it. That's it. And I just connecting back to McCartney, he's just such a prolific and incredible songwriter that no matter what he puts down, no matter what he does, it's going to connect because he's just that good. He's like modern
Mhm.
Mozart.
Yeah. Well, you're saying about playing it on the piano. For me, the litmus test of a good song, or I should say of a great song, is one that can be done in multiple styles and have it sound true in each of those styles.
Sure.
Sure.
Yeah. I've heard cover versions where it's like, okay, I give you points for trying to do a song of this style in a different way, but the song itself just doesn't work in that.
Right.
But then
Right.
you have those songs that can be interpreted in so many ways, and you realize, like the songs like the Great American Songbook, those songs have been done, umpteen different times in styles, but it works. That's just a testimony to how well written those songs are.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And there's a fine line between that stuff too, where like some things, because every song is different and every song is written in a different way. Not everything's going to translate like that, right? So there are some things that are tailor-made to focus on, like it's primarily a production, not really about the song, and so it's just this sonic experience, right? And that's a totally different thing. But then you have like songs from the Great American Songbook, or the Beatles stuff, or stuff from that era, 60s, 70s, 80s, where
The
it
Brill
was
Building
hyper,
songs.
Mm.
hyper song focused. And so they're more adaptable in a way because the focus was so much on the song. And you had like all the great songwriting teams, Carole King and Jerry Goffin and all these people, who, I mean, they sat at the piano and wrote these songs for acts, and that was their job. And so I think there's something to be said about the fact that those songs obviously have been covered by so many different people. I mean, hundreds upon hundreds of acts have done covers of a lot of those songs from that era. And I think it's the way they were written structurally, but also sometimes it can be hard to adapt some of that stuff, especially I find that if something is so iconic, like if there's a definitive recording of something, it's kind of difficult to do it justice in a way,
Sure.
where it's like,
Mhm.
because for me, like whenever we decide to do a cover, we always think about like, what are we bringing to this that's different? Because if we're not bringing something that's unique to us or from our perspective, why are we doing it?
Right.
And so we always have that discussion whenever we decide to cover anything. It's like, are we bringing something unique to this from our own voice, or are we just doing it to cover it?
I
Yeah. See,
I think that would be an interesting project, though, if you would like to do that, like songs that like have like just they're known for their production, like Cars, right? Like here in my car, that's so iconic,
Yeah.
you know. But it would be so interesting to do like an interesting cover of that song because it's just that, you know, and the instrumental part. But that's like it's so about the production. I think that'd be interesting.
Mhm.
Yeah, well, see, that's one of the things that what you said, Anthony, is I say frequently on here. You know, when it comes to cover versions, I've heard so many note for note covers. My attitude is, why even bother?
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah, if you can't bring something new to that song, then you're just wasting everybody's time, basically.
Right.
You might as
Yeah.
well
And
just listen to the original version.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, there are some songs that I think that there's just, you know, pretty much impossible to top, you know, or
Right.
to do anything with. One of the songs that I thought that about, but had my mind changed, was Del Shannon's Runaway.
Hmm.
That song is, I mean, it is pop perfection,
Yeah.
in my opinion. However, the Cox family did a bluegrass version of it that is just unbelievable.
Really.
If you haven't heard it and you're a Del Shannon fan, check it out. Cox family, Runaway.
I will.
Very
Just
cool.
really, really cool. But that gets back to that. If you take it in a different direction and do something, Dolly Parton is fantastic at that. I mean, who would have thunk that she could do a cover of Shine and have it sound like it was written for her?
Absolutely.
You know,
Or
And
or
on the
Johnny Cash doing Hurt, which is one of my favorite versions ever.
yeah, yeah. I
and
mean,
on the flip,
go ahead.
no, yeah. Now, speaking of Dolly Parton, I mean, on the flip side of her career, like as a writer, I mean, you know,
Oh yeah.
she wrote. I mean, when you listen to her version of "I Will Always Love You" and then you listen to Whitney Houston, it's like a completely different thing.
Mhm.
So it's really fun when things like that happen because Dolly Parton is such a great interpreter herself. So when you hear someone take your song, I mean, it must be an unbelievable feeling, like almost surreal to have written something like "I Will Always Love You," and then, you know, however many years later, Whitney Houston does it in a completely different version.
Yeah,
It must be an amazing thing as the songwriter to be like, wow, they did
especially
that.
after that song has gone number one twice.
Yeah.
First in
Right.
74, then in 82, and then a decade later, Whitney does that version that becomes an absolute monster.
Yeah. Yeah,
But
it's
that
an
gets
amazing
back to
thing.
that whole, great song
Right.
idea.
That's right.
So now, besides Beatles, other big influences on you guys.
Dave Grohl, 1000%. He's the man, and not just his musicianship, which we can talk about for the next hour, but him as a person. Because I don't know if you saw this recently, but there were a lot of people stranded in LA, and he just took his gigantic smoker, and he busted it down and set it up. Didn't tell anybody, and all of a sudden he's barbecuing 24 hours straight for these people. I think they were affected by the snowstorms out there. And that's just a testament to like who he is as a person. And that's real rock star right there. He's so awesome. But yes, he's a huge influence on the both of us. I can speak for Anthony because he's the one who showed me the Foo Fighters.
Yeah. Yeah, we love them. It's interesting. Because our dad was a musician, he introduced us to a lot of different things, and because he primarily, you know, he had a big band, and he primarily did the Great American Songbook material, but he also wrote some original things, and so they would do that, and so we got all of the Sinatra, Nat King Cole, Bobby Darin, Tony Bennett, like all that stuff when we were kids. In addition to the Beatles stuff, the Stones, all the classic rock. Motown was big for us when we were growing up. Stevie Wonder, Marvin Gaye,
Queen.
and Queen. And our mom was more into like musical theater. So I remember we used to sit and watch like West Side Story and South Pacific and Oklahoma with her. So we got all of that from her, as well as like some of the softer rock stuff. She loves the Carpenters and Fleetwood Mac. So we really got this wide breadth of influences when we were kids, in addition to, you know, the stuff that we grew up with, like Foo Fighters and yeah,
Killers.
Killers, Coldplay.
That
Yeah,
whole like
a lot of
2004, 2005 era was really big for the both of us.
Yeah.
Kind of like shaped me personally, shaped my musical journey of like what I wanted to do. Because I was very much of a classic rock fan, but as soon as I heard like Foo Fighters but even so, Coldplay and the Killers and that entire era, and then going into like Kings of Leon and Imagine Dragons, the early Imagine Dragons stuff and stuff like that. That's kind of like what shaped what I love and what I love to make.
Yeah. Tell me this. Well, first, yeah, I'm going to digress for a moment here. Anthony, you mentioned West Side Story.
Sure.
We were talking about, you know, cool covers that take it. Yeah, thanks. A number of years back now, there was a, you know, tribute album, if you will, called The Songs of West Side Story. And I got it because there's a Brian Setzer track on there when you're a jet. However, what I didn't know what was on there was Little Richard doing I Feel Pretty.
Wow.
And it is brilliant, absolutely brilliant. So if you're not familiar with that, you know, check that out too. If you are a fan of West Side
I would love to hear that.
So,
wow.
But where I was going before I had the call back there, you're talking about all the bands from the mid 2000s era. Are you guys who hear a new act, and then kind of trace back who their influences were, if you're not already familiar with it?
Yeah, I think I don't want to speak for Steve, but I think that we both, whenever we get into an act heavily, we want to know everything about it. So, and to me, I love history in general. So whenever I'm passionate about something, I want to learn everything about it. I want to know why they make the kind of music that they make and what influenced them, because I like investigating that stuff, you know. So it's like, well, if that influenced them, maybe I should go check that out,
right,
and see why, you know. So yeah, for me, it's always interesting to hear the influences of the people who have influenced me.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, today we've talked about everybody else's music. We should probably get into talking about Rebel Kicks tracks here.
Who are those guys?
You haven't heard of them? I think you might like them. You guys actually officially formed, if you will, about 5 years ago?
Yeah, 2018 was when we officially launched.
Yeah. How did you guys take all these divergent influences and musical tastes to create what has become Rebel Kicks?
Well, we had it kind of goes back even further than that. Anthony and I have been playing together since we're kids, but we had bands, different forms of the band. Anthony had his own solo band, which I played in, and then we formed this band, Sons of Origin, which was kind of like alt rock. It was like kind of like a little bit modeled after the Foo Fighters, that kind of sound. And then we had been like searching for a sound. We'd been recording for like a long time, and we didn't know what we wanted to fall on. We didn't know what path we wanted to go. We tried pop for a while, like super pop, and that wasn't really us. And then we were like, no, we need to be more rock, you know, because that's who we are as people. We ended up playing South by Southwest as Sons of Origin, and then we went out to LA for a while, and then recorded Fall of the American Dream, which ended up being our first single as Rebel Kicks. And at that entire time, we were looking for the name. We were looking who we wanted to be. And I don't know if you remember that song. Is it Feel It Still? Yeah, Feel It Still by Portugal the Man.
Mm-hmm.
And we were searching for a name for like 2 years. And all of a sudden I heard the lyrics like, "Ooh, I'm a rebel just for kicks now." And I was like, that could be a cool name. You know, I remember driving in the car with him, and I was like, "What do you think of that?" He was like, that's actually not bad. That's a pretty cool name. And then it just kind of snowballed from there. And we hit upon this sound that not only like harkens back to our roots, our rock roots, but also we're creating something completely new. Like it's like this electronic meets rock fusion together. So that's kind of where we're at right now.
Yeah. Well, the first gig that you guys did, take us back to that. What was your going through your mind as you went out there, trying putting out stuff that was new and you don't know what kind of response it's going to get?
The first Rebel Kicks gig was at the Bowery Electric in New York City. I remember it was a great night. We had a packed house. And I think because we had gone through this period of developing all this new material, not even the stuff that we ended up putting out, but like going through the process of the in between the Sons of Origin period and then launching Rebel Kicks, of trying to try different things and see where we landed. And so, like Steve said, we did write a bunch and record a bunch of really, really poppy material. And then like through that process, we realized like, we enjoy this, but this isn't particularly what we want to put out under, whatever the moniker is going to be. And so we kept experimenting with the sound and with the direction. And once we hit upon, it's funny, like to go forward, like sometimes you go in a loop, right? So we came back around to the rock sound, but it was this fusion of the rock sound that we had with a more electronic influence, which is really what we got from working in LA and in Florida with a couple of producers down there. And so through that process, we realized like, oh no, we can just take these things that we've learned and employ them, into our strengths, which is really rock music, pop rock. And so once we went out and started performing this stuff, we already wholeheartedly believed in the direction and the songs. And we were just excited to be out there performing the material. So that was for me, it was just really exciting to do it.
Yeah. Tell me this, because you guys have, multiple influences when you're writing. Do you start out first? Are you music first? You come up with a groove or a riff and then you build lyrics on it? Or are you a lyrics first, music second type?
We've done it.
Approach?
We've done it both ways.
Yeah.
Every song is different and the way they happen is different. So that we don't really have a set way that we write. Like sometimes I will have a set of lyrics that I'm just working on, that I have I have like 1,000 notes and voice memos on my phone.
Sure.
So we're constantly laying things down, and Steve is as well. And then we bring things to each other because we're not necessarily always in the same room. So we'll come up with ideas separately, then bring them together, or we write in the same room, eyeball to eyeball. So every song is different that way, which keeps it interesting.
Right. For me personally, I've done that a couple of times in my life where I've just written poems and then set music to it. But for me, music hits me where I'm the most vulnerable, which is in the shower. Every single time. And I can't even tell you how many times I've like burst out of the shower and like grabbed my phone and dripping wet and trying to sing into the phone every single time. I don't know. It just hits me in there. Every single melody I've ever come up with, it's been in the bathroom. I don't know what that says about me, but that's what it is.
Hey, you worked for Freddie Mercury, a crazy little thing called Love. So
if it works for him, that's fine. It works for me.
Now, just out of curiosity, when you're writing, Steve, is your style different than Anthony's as far as like your approach, or where you usually tend to start with songwriting wise?
I feel like we have similar styles, but I'm more of like a phonetic type of person where I really don't have lyrics. I hear one thing and I base the entire chorus or the song around that one thing because I know I need that in there. Whatever that lyric that I just came up with, all right, we got to write it around that. Like it's just got to be that. I guess that's where I come from usually, and then I'll bring it to Anthony and be like, "What do you think of this?" And he'll be like, "All right, let's do it," and then we'll write something around that.
Yeah. Now tell me this, since your songs are very atmospheric production wise. How developed are you usually with the record as far as your idea when you first go into the studio, and how much does it usually change from the time you get there to the time you're done?
That's an interesting question. I think on the whole, we'll have a general idea going in how we want it to sound, but at the same time, neither of us are adverse to trying anything.
Yeah.
So if someone comes up with an interesting production or arrangement idea on the spot in the studio, let's try it and see if it works. That's kind of how we approach everything. Is like, well, how will you know if you don't try it? So let's lay it down. Let's see if it works within the context of everything else that's happening. And that's how we approach our recordings. So just try to be as open-minded as possible.
I think we learned that from working with big producers and just like all ideas are good ideas. And if you don't try it, then that's not the room that I want to be in. I want to try everything. Like everybody, if someone has a good idea and I want to work what works best for the song. Because that's what matters. Like my ego doesn't matter. His ego doesn't matter. The producer's ego doesn't matter. How is the song going to translate the best? And if that idea works, let's go with it.
Yeah. So you're basically the tone of the song dictates what direction you go production wise.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, tell you talk about some of the songs. Hamartia. Tell us about that song.
That was something that we co-wrote from scratch together, but it was just, I actually think I had a completely different set of lyrics that were attached to it.
Yeah.
That was a poem that we started writing music to, and then oddly enough, the only thing that survived in the final version was the hook, which was Hamartia. Everything else, after listening to it for a little while, both of us looked at each other and were like, this doesn't really work.
Yeah.
And we went back and revised both music and wrote a completely different set of lyrics, which was really, really, it's always interesting when that happens. You lay something down and then you're completely in love with it. And then you come back to it a month later and you go, no.
That's why it's so important to walk away. It's so important. Come back to it because like a fresh set of ears is like so good for music. We really did. We had something completely different and we loved the hook and we set it away from a long time. And then we listened to it in the car and the both of us were like, nah. But when the hook hit,
hook, though.
We were like, all right, we can do something with this hook though. And then that's how that happened.
Well, for me, when you're trying to do something creative, forcing it rarely helps.
Right.
Yeah.
You got to let it breathe.
Yeah.
And if it's good, it'll find its way to fruition.
Absolutely. And it's funny, like both of us try not to have an ego about anything that we create. So if something's not working, it's just as simple as saying that, you know what, this doesn't work. Let's go back to the drawing board. Why doesn't this work? Let's identify what the problems are. If it's worth revising or if we just discard it, I mean, Pablo Picasso used to, he ripped up all his early work and no one's ever seen it, so it's, it's one of those things where it's like, you know what, you have to be able to kill your ego sometimes when you're creating art.
Exactly. How about It's You? And how did that come to be used in Shameless?
All right. So It's You happened as I was walking from my living room to the kitchen. And in the middle of it, I heard.
Did you bypass the shower by chance?
I bypassed the shower and it just hit me like a ping. And no, that melody, like, it's you. And I remember like I stopped and stood there and I heard that. And then I literally like spun around to Anthony. I was like, what do you think of that? At the time, Breaking Bad was like huge. And I think it was the final season. And spoiler alert, this is where like Hank finds out Walt is Breaking Bad. He's the bad guy. And we were like, this could be a cool song about betrayal and like someone that you trust so much, that you love so much. And we wrote the song completely about that. It's about that, but it's also about Breaking Bad, which is a cool little fun fact. And then we had sent it out and we put it into a catalog with this place called Music Playground. And all of a sudden they just they messaged us and we were like, you're going to be on season 9 of Shameless, just so you know. I was like, oh, that's awesome. Which is cool. So it was really, that's a great thing and a really good feeling when you get your songs on a TV show.
Yeah, I would think. So now, did you watch that episode after they told you it was going to be on there? Did you sit there waiting for it to come on?
Oh yeah, I watched the episode. I had no idea what was going on, and then I binged Shameless after that all the way, and now I'm all caught up, which is great. But yeah, it was really cool.
Yeah. Now, what's the backstory on "We Should Go Missing"?
That's a song that we co-wrote with 2 other songwriters. They're unbelievably talented songwriters, producers, and instrumentalists. 2 guys named Jackson Hoffman and Ryder Stewart, and their studios in Brooklyn. And we got involved with them. And the way they work is really interesting because we set up a session, went to their studio in Brooklyn, and we all sat down and we had never met before. And so we just sat in the studio for a little while and we were just talking just like this and talking about our influences and the kind of music we like. And then we started talking about what kind of production or song that we want to create. And they're very much, the way they work is like, well, okay, let's get an idea and then we'll develop it. And that's exactly what we did. And we sat in a circle. Steve had the opening riff.
I actually had something on piano that we ended up turning on the
into a guitar riff. Yeah. And so Steve was playing his bass, and we all had acoustic guitars. And so he played us this voice memo with this piano lick. And then we took it and translated it onto guitar and built the chorus around that riff. And then Ryder had the phrase, I think every songwriter now that has an iPhone or whatever, they have on their notepad like little ideas or just like things. And so we were all just scrolling on our phone looking for just like interesting phrases or titles. And he was like, well, I have this, I always thought that the phrase we should go missing could be really cool to use. I don't know what it means, but we can explore that. And we were like, yeah, actually. And then we started talking about, well, what do you think it means? What does that mean to you? And the idea of escape came up, where it was like, we should go missing. To me is like, not literally missing, but you and someone you care about, let's just get out of here, away from this reality of whatever is dark around you, and we can get away from all that. So we built the song around that. And like I said, their process, and this has happened every time that we've written with them, which is a bunch now, where we wrote the music first with the melody, and then we started adding words in as we were going. But as we were doing that, we started recording right away. So the song wasn't even finished yet. There wasn't a complete lyric set. As we were working on the lyrics, Jackson jumped into the booth and started laying the drums down. Steve was laying his bass down. I started laying guitars down. Ryder was playing guitars. and I'm writing words, and we're all shouting out stuff to each other. And so it has this very immediate sound, and everything that we've done with them, including the new song Silhouette, which is also a song that we co-wrote and produced with them. They all have this very fresh, like hot off the skillet immediacy about them, which I love because that's exactly how they were created. It was just bang, 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 bang. We're writing the song, now we're laying it down, and it just has this, like, you can hear the energy in the recordings because that's how we did it.
Yeah, well, that song has got kind of a new wave tinge to it. From that early late 70s, early 80s new wave era, who are some of the folks that you kind of gravitate to?
Duran. So I mean, all of them can play, especially the bassist. Like now, I play with a new wave band, which is really cool, in Long Island, called Love Song. They're awesome, and I didn't really grow up with these songs at all. But I feel like I'm discovering, like, all the guys laugh at me because they're in their 50s and they're all like, "You've never heard the song before?" I'm like, "Never." But I'm discovering like all this incredible music now. I feel like I'm listening to, like, these guys like know these songs forever, and I'm like, this is amazing shit. So definitely Duran. Definitely Tears for Fears. I think they're one of the best bands of all time. In Excess, for sure. They got that. What's that song? I need you tonight. Great tune. Such like a sexy tune that's just like so down and dirty. It's great.
I love the
Andrew
Cars.
Ferris was actually on the show and told the story behind how that song came to be.
Really?
Oh, cool.
So which is a really interesting story. So, but I didn't mean to cut you off, Anthony.
Oh, no, not at all. That's awesome. No, I was saying I love the Cars and Talking Heads, Devo,
Sure.
all that stuff is so great.
Yeah, Bowie had such a huge influence on that era. And when you listen to it, Kraftwerk and some of the bands like that did too, but they were obviously heavier than the stuff. It was kind of like a more pop accessible Bowie in a lot of cases, combined with like the R&B influence of In Excess. And Cars combine so many different things. So, but now with continuing with your songs, Paint with the Music On.
Yeah, that's a song we co-wrote with our drummer Dan Bradley, and that was just music first. We were in a rehearsal. We had a show, and so I think it was just the three of us because our keyboard player wasn't available for the rehearsal that night. So it was just us as a trio running through the set list for the show we had coming up. And then we did that fairly quickly. And then we were just sitting around, and, when you get us in a room, like, inevitably music is just going to start coming out. And so the three of us started jamming. And I think we did like 4 or 5 different jams that night after we were done rehearsing. And Paint with the Music On, or what would become Paint with the Music On, was one of those jams. And so we recorded the stuff on our phones, and we always put all those jams in a Dropbox folder, so we all have access to it, and so we can all listen. And I remember that one specifically stood out to us because we just loved the groove. And so then Steve and I went off a couple of days later, and I was like, "Hey, did you get a chance to listen to those jams that we did the other night?" And he was like, "Yeah, which one was cool?" And then he pulled that one up, and I was like, "Yeah, that's the one I was going to say." And he was like, "Yeah, we should develop this into just write some lyrics and some melodies for it, because it's got a vibe." And so then we spent a couple of hours writing lyrics for it. I think we were on a Zoom session, actually.
Yeah, we had gotten into meditation, and so that's kind of a metaphor for meditation, just closing your eyes and painting with the music on, which I thought was a cool little metaphor for it.
Yeah. Now, how about floating? Oh, go ahead. Sorry, Anthony.
Oh, no, yeah. Floating is the same idea. I think a lot of the songs that we wrote through the pandemic, especially in the isolation of lockdown and everything, um, because both of us were meditating and dealing with all of that stuff in a similar way. We were approaching a lot of the lyrics we were writing from a similar perspective. And so floating is also dealing with that topic of, inner exploration and finding your calm, shutting out the noise of the outside world.
Sure. And
Yeah.
that's another song that was a revision we'd had for a while. I wrote that song completely hammered. I was I was in New York City. I was crossing the street going to my friend's apartment, and it literally hit me in the middle of the crosswalk.
He's always in motion.
I'm always in motion, even in the shower. But I remember being absolutely wasted, and I ran to my friend's apartment, and I didn't even say hi. I was like, "Do you have a piano?" And he was like, "Yeah, hey." I ran to his piano and I plunked it down. Yeah. And then I had it for a while, and then we finally decided to do it.
Yeah. Now, how did you come to add mandolin to that track?
I just had a mandolin lying around, and it's one of those things where, like we were saying before, anything goes when we're making a track. And so we were laying the guitars and, the foundation of the song down, guitar, bass, drums. And that's actually a track that I play drums on. So we did all of that from our home studio. And I remember I just turned and I was like, how do you feel about using the mandolin to support the guitar lines? And he was like, let's try it. And as soon as we laid it down, we were both like, this gives it just such a different texture compared to some of our other things. And we've used mandolin on a few things now. Yeah. So it's it just has such a unique sound to it,
Right. Yeah. One more before we get into the new stuff. No One Like You.
That came from a person that I was dating at the time, and it came straight from the heart. I think it was a poem at first, and then I kind of set it to music, and it just came to me within like 3 minutes.
You had that piano motif, right?
I had the piano, and I brought it to Anthony, and then we kind of just it was like an easy 30-minute. We laid it down, and it was like 1, 2, 3. It was. Yeah, that's just how I was feeling at the time, and that's pretty much it.
That one always reminds me, not that it's necessarily reminiscent of it. It's just, sometimes when you're creating thing, you have a certain thing in mind that you're associating with it. So for me, when I hear that track, I always think of the Killer song, All These Things That I've Done, where it has this tremendous build to the end. And so in my mind, I always have that association with that. Just to me, it has a similar sort of vibe to it, where it just continuously builds and builds and builds until it explodes into this big section at the end. So that one's really fun to do live.
Yeah, I bet. Now, Steve or Anthony, you mentioned Silhouette, the new track. Tell us all about that one.
Another song we co-wrote, as I said, with Jackson and Ryder, and written in the same way that We Should Go Missing was, except I threw out the idea of using Silhouette as the hook. And then we all started talking about, well, what does that mean? What does that mean to you? And we thought it would be a really fun POV to use Silhouette as a metaphor for, the idea of like the having the idea of someone initially, whether it's in a relationship, before you get into a relationship, where you sort of build this idea in your mind of who this person is, and you have this fantasy version of them. And then once you get to know them, the fantasy shatters, and you wish you could go back to that blissful ignorance before. which we thought was kind of funny and cheeky, and especially because the music is so upbeat. If you isolate the lyrics, it's sort of like they can be a little bit of a downer, but it's like a funny downer, where it's you're looking at this thing where it's like, well, I wish I could just go back to that, and and know you less than I do now.
I can't even tell you how many times I've played it for girls, and they've been like, "Oh, I connect with this so hard." Good, that's what we want. Good.
Exactly. Now tell me this: what upcoming projects you have going, singles coming out, what have you?
We actually we're going to release our first cover in a few weeks from now. So March 22nd, we're releasing a cover version of Please Please Me by the Beatles. And the Beatles are not a group that I ever thought we were going to do just a straight recorded cover of. Like live is a different thing. You can do anything live, but when you're making a record, I'm always very wary about doing cover stuff, and especially the Beatles, because they are exceptionally hard to me to do justice to, because all their arrangements are so perfect.
Yeah.
So I was listening to Please Please Me, and unbeknownst to me, I didn't realize that the 60th anniversary was coming up. And we're actually putting the single out, our version out, the same day as the 60th anniversary, which is March 22nd. And so I was listening to that album, and that song came on. I was just listening to it going, it's amazing. This is 60 years ago, and there's just such a freshness to this. There's this youthful energy about those early Beatles recordings, like Please Please Me and She Loves You and I Want to Hold Your Hand, and where you can it's a live band in a room, and you can hear it in the recordings, like how much fun and excitement there is in that room. So I was just sitting there listening to it going, it could be fun to see how this would translate in an arrangement that was not so far away from theirs, but sort of adapted into the style of Silhouette and We Should Go Missing and the stuff that we're doing now, into this like up pseudo pop punky new wave thing that we're doing. And so I just immediately started laying it down and finished it in about 25 minutes, 30 minutes on my end. And then I sent the recording to Steve and said, hey, I just got this idea. Let me know what you think of it, and if you think it's worth pursuing. And so he listened to it, and he didn't even respond to me. He just laid his tracks down at his home studio, sent it back to me, and said, yeah, love it. Let's mix it and put it out. And so I listened to his tracks, then I mixed it, and it was done. And then I started sending it to our management, and they loved it. And then they actually told us that the 60th anniversary was coming up. And we were like, oh, well, that's kind of perfect.
Yeah, exactly.
So that's coming out in March. And then we have our next original song that's slated to come out is called Electrophoria, which will be out either in late April or early May, which is more along the lines of Hamartia and Fall the American Dream, where it's got that indie rock fused with the electro pop thing going on.
I would call it underground indie rock. That's the only way I can describe this song. It's very cool. It's got a very cool vibe.
Yeah, good deal. Now, are you guys going to be touring?
Yeah, we're working on some dates now.
We
just played Rockwood Music Hall last weekend. It was sold out, and it was just so much fun to be up on stage doing all the new material, and it really went over really, really well.
Every song, and it was all new stuff too, and the crowd really vibed to every song, which we were very happy about.
Yeah, because that's not usually the case.
No, you can. I've seen some faces where it's been like, but it was really nice to have like everybody just kind of like rocking out to every song, and that's what I want. I just want people like leaving our concerts being like, that was dope. I can't wait to see them again.
Absolutely. Well, tell me this, guys. Is there anything that we haven't gotten to that you want to make sure we touch on before we wrap this one up?
I would say, just check us out on we're at Rebel Kicks Music across all social media. Our website's rebelkicks.com. If you dig what we're doing, please send us a message, email us, DM us on Instagram or Facebook, and we always respond to those messages. So
we're really friendly, I promise.
You're not scary.
I'm not scary. My hair might be scary, but it's fine.
All right, guys. We'll tell you what. Thanks for joining us here on the show.
Thank you so much, Michael.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us.
No problem. All right, everyone. We're going to bring this one to a close. Have a good night.
Thank you.
This has been Music Night at the Majestic with Michael Boswell. If you enjoyed this edition of Music Night at the Majestic, follow us on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Instagram, and at musicnight.net. Music Night at the Majestic is a copyright production of Starliner Media. Any use of the accounts and descriptions of this program, its audio or visual content, without the express written consent of Starliner Media is prohibited. Thank you for joining us this evening. We'll see you next time for Music Night at the Majestic. This is your announcer speaking. Starliner Media.